try to add some remarks to the characteristics that the rector took forward about the Danish model, the Danish social model as we have developed it over the decades. First, Denmark, as Madame said, the Danish democracy started at small scale, one could say, more than 160 years ago in 1849 with the first free constitution. That was not democracy in the modern sense of the word. Women and poor people didn't vote, but it was the first time that part of the ordinary population was equipped with the right to vote for a parliament that could give the laws of the Kingdom of Denmark. And gradually, in a process of at least 50 years, but in reality even longer, we developed the kind of democratic model we're using now. After some 50 years, the king recognized the parliamentary system of Denmark, meaning that it was the majority of the parliament that should decide who should be the government. And voting rights were extended to everybody now, every Danish citizen over the age of 18. And the individual rights and freedoms were stated even more clearly in the constitutions up to the present one, who has been working since 1953. The Danish political system in this past 100 years has actually been a multi-party system. No single party has had the power to decide everything. Governments most often have been not majority governments, but often minority coalition governments, 1, 2, 3 parties going together, but being dependent on one or more other parties in parliament for the support of their proposals. And that has meant a long tradition of, on important areas of politics, to use the consensus model, include more or less, when you had center-left governments, also the center-right parties, and the other side around, on important issues of, for instance, legislation on the public school, where we have had broad compromises, broad agreements between the parties for decades and decades. But when we talk about the reasons why we are scoring so high in the Transparency International Index, very low corruption and so on, it has to do with a lot of things. It has to do, I think, with the minority government tradition. It has to do with the Danish democracy being developed and carried forward by strong NGOs, you could say, non-government organizations, but especially at the beginning of our democracy, the cooperatives and farmers' cooperatives, the workers' trade unions, were very important tools for the democratic development and for the participation of ordinary people in the decision-making in society. Denmark is a very organized society. Nearly everybody belongs to some kind of organization. And we have had, when you talk about the Danish model, we have had strong involvement of strong organizations also in the preparation of legislation over the years. And there's been a kind of division of labor between the organizations of labor and industry on the one side, making their collective agreements on labor market conditions, and the legislation we have made in the parliament. But we have also, and I think here we have experiences worth exporting. We have also developed strong institutions connected with the parliament in order to supervise government and administration. We have a strong, independent Auditor General institution, well-staffed, well-paid, well-educated people who are taking a firm look on the way the government spends the money. Not only that they only use the money in accordance with the budget law, but also that they use the money in a wise way. The transparency in the handling of taxpayers' money is extremely essential for a true democratic development. And then we have developed, as one of the first nations, together with Sweden, the Ombudsman institution. I don't know how familiar you are with that institution, but that's a person with an organization behind him who is equipped with the powers to go in and when a person is in some kind of conflict with the administration, with the authorities, with the public servants, with the government, they can go to him. They can say, we think we are not being treated the right way, and he can make his comments on that. But the good thing about it is that nearly every time the Ombudsman makes a judgment, a recommendation, his authority is so strong that it's followed by the administration or the government, as it is the fact with the Auditor General's recommendations and sent through the Public Accounts Committee and Parliament to the administration. So when we talk about the absence of corruption, transparency, it has much to do with this institutional setup. And both the audit institution and the Ombudsman is not funded by the government, but by decisions in the Parliament. Also in that way strengthen the division of powers between Parliament and government. But transparency, of course, also has a lot to do with the working of the media. The freedom of the press and the responsible and effective use of the media, of the freedom of the press, is a very important factor in ensuring the transparency of the state in general. One point more, which will bring me on to some more global observations on the workings of democracy. I think that the fact, as Rector pointed out, that we have been able to create a society in Denmark and the other Nordic countries and a number of other European countries where the distribution of income and wealth is rather equal, also contributes to the good working of democracy. What do I mean with that? My point is that maybe the strongest challenge to the intended principles of democratic government is if big money take controls over political parties and the political scene. You can illustrate that in many ways, and it's rather common around the world that where you have big inequalities, very strong monopolies of economic power, they also execute big influence on the political system and the media, and in a way are able to twist the whole scenery of political decision making, and up to the internet revolution at least, also the information accessible for most people. Think of Italy under Berlusconi, or think of Murdoch in Britain, or whatever. Think of even back in 1960, President Eisenhower of the United States, before leaving office, warned against the military-industrial complex in the United States being too influential also on the political scene. I think that was not a warning listened to. I think if you look at the United States today, big money, big industrial institutions, big companies have a huge influence on both political parties there. But you could expand this argument further. You could say we got a financial crisis 4 years ago, maybe because of the lack of control with some huge financial institutions, maybe only 9 of them on the global scene, being able to pay themselves out of the necessary control with their activities and making it possible for them to drive a very big part of the world out in a financial crisis through their gambling away a lot of money in the global economy. So there are some very fundamental questions, I think, also present in this country about the workings of democracy, the balance of the democratic institutions towards the economic powerhouses you have. And of course there is a special phenomenon which is difficult to deal with in those countries where authoritarian or dictatorial regimes were taken out, disappeared, but where the functionaries of those systems were able in the transition process to take over huge part of the national wealth and concentrate themselves as oligarchs. We see that in Russia. You may see something of it also in your country. These kind of problems puzzles me a lot. And it was summarized actually when I had a conversation with Joe Stiglitz, the Nobel Prize winner in economics last spring when he was in Copenhagen, where he summarized all this in the discussion. Maybe the problem is that we only have the best government money can buy. Well, that was the remarks I had on transparency and democracy development, and then maybe just a few words as a comment to what Rector said about our Danish model. I can tell you the way to the internet to read a little book I wrote about it. I will not go through all of it, but I think that you are rightly pointing out that some of the most interesting characteristics of Danish and Nordic societies are the, as you mentioned, the rather equal distribution of wealth and income, the rather equal participation of men and women on the labor market and in the whole life of society, and the demonstration that that growth and social justice, a rather high level of taxes, is not necessarily in contradiction to each other. Because, well, you can have a high level of taxes, but if you use the taxes in a way that it increases your social harmony and your competitiveness as a nation on education, on research and so on infrastructure, on kindergartens, because otherwise the women would not be able to participate in the labor market with the same amount as men, and so on. If you use the money appropriate and wise, it will not be a burden for competitiveness, but a precondition for the competitiveness you have reached. That's an interesting observation. I will not in any way say that this model can be exported, you can take it in Indonesia. No, it's much more difficult than that. And many of the characteristics of the Danish society were something we developed over decades and decades and are still correcting, because we are not without challenges either. We cannot say for sure that what we managed to do, we are able to continue for decades to come. We are not able to say that we are not necessarily able to maintain our status as one of the richest countries in the world, because you people are competing very hard, not only in Indonesia but in most of Asia, and that's at least presenting us with a long row of challenges. The short version being that with so many people successfully going for better life, better living standard, as we see all over in Asia, China, India, Vietnam, Indonesia, whatever. The better life we will all have in the coming decades is not exactly the type of life we have had, because the new situation is that resources will be scarce, that oil and gas, traditional energy resources will be scarce, minerals will be scarce, even meat will be scarce or so, where everybody is going to have more. And that means that you cannot necessarily copy the way we have been rich, but we will not be rich in the same way we were, because the market mechanisms and hopefully early political decisions also in fighting climate change and so on will mean that we will have to change our lifestyle, our way of life. Not necessarily worse, but surely very, very different from what we used to have. That was the few words I should like to give for this discussion. I'm sure all my colleagues here maybe not exactly agree with me on everything, but they will surely be very happy to participate in a discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for a very inspiring speech. For your information, ladies and gentlemen, this program is broadcast through web streaming. So anybody in the world, including in Denmark, can watch our program, and actually they can also ask questions. So you're on the web. Without further ado, I would like to invite questions from audience. I'll pick 5 at this moment. 1, 2, 3, 4. One more? 5. Okay, please. Please identify your name and university. For your information, we invite not only students from our university, but also several universities around Jakarta. Yeah, please.
Okay, good evening, Mr. Morgens Lykketoft. Okay, let me introduce myself. My name is Darwin from the Institution of Social and Politics of Jakarta. My question is, as rectors of Indonesia says that Indonesia was a very rich country, but in here we have some trouble because of some corruptor in Indonesia. Indonesia's government, our nation be nothing now. We are in chaos now. So may I ask you some help and advice? What is your advice to finish corruption in Indonesia to become a clean government as Denmark's government? Maybe that is. Thank you for your concern.
Second question, yes. Yang ketiga, tolong berdiri di standby. Okay, thank you.
Hej, jeg hedder Joe. Jeg vil prøve at sige den spørgsmål på dansk. Men,
please identify yourself.
My name is Joe. I go to University of Indonesia. I take physics. but I am interested in corruption in politics as well, because we do live it every day. Ja, så jeg har boet i Danmark for 7 år, og jeg elsker Danmark. Det er et rigtig godt land. Okay, min spørgsmål, jeg skal spørge mine spørgsmål på engelsk.
You better ask in English, yes.
Ja, fordi...
Good to know you've been in Denmark.
Do you think this Danish model you have could be applied if your population was, let's say,